Hi, my name's Janice Switlo, and I would like to just again thank Cackling Cactus Curiosities for their generous provision of their premises so I can film and do this. Without that support by providing these premises, it'd be difficult for me to be able to speak with you. So thank you again. Today I want to describe a little bit about Indigenous law. And this may come across as a little bit difficult to follow or understand. It's one of those things that until such time as you experience it, it's kind of difficult to follow a verbal description of it, because it very much is something that you experience to understand that worldview. And just to fill you in a bit on how I came to be able to walk in that world, if you will. And how the knowledge was shared with me and opened me to being able to access certain knowledge and direction and guidance. And that is, the abilities of these elders, now ancestors. They can assess a person simply by looking at them, looking in their eyes. They literally can see into your soul, so to speak. Because many of the elders that came to me hadn't really met me. They had seen me, or they'd watched me. They might have heard a little bit of something I said, but there wasn't a huge relationship in a normal sense that had developed that led them to, over time, then say, hey, this is someone that I want to share my knowledge with, and allow her to carry and share with others as the time she deems appropriate. So it really started with these kinds of elders literally showing up at my doorstep and spending the night. I'd be coming in. I was running a full practice then, law practice, and I'd be coming in off the road, at 8 o'clock or something, exhausted from a full 12 hours or so of work and practice of law, and there would be an elder pull up about 5 minutes after I arrived. The timing is always interesting, because that's part of it, and so we get the coffee pot on, and we'd be talking, and it would go through the night, and the sun would be rising. But in terms of a sense of fatigue, comparing that time, which was the same amount of hours as, for instance, I had put in the practice of law earlier that day, or the day before by that time, it was different. It felt like only an hour had passed. It's a situation where you get into, I guess maybe athletes have that. It's kind of a zone, I think that's the term they use. It's a place that you share, and you don't have any aches and pains. I mean, these are elders that, could barely walk sometimes, and yet they would have no aches and pains. And they would be able to do this and do it as long as necessary. And this way, and it takes a lot of hours. But now, people's attentions are short. This format, I'm using a few minutes of your time. The difficulty is, people in law school, for instance, as these law schools are going to try to take on teaching Indigenous law, or at least exposing their students to some aspects of it. We have a lot of students who are not thinkers anymore. They repeat what they've been told. If you regurgitate the same stuff you heard on your exam, you're going to get a certain grade. And that's really what it's about, getting the credentials that'll get you the job, that'll get you the income, that kind of thing. This is not how Indigenous law is passed on. It's a very time-consuming process. And the biggest thing is that you just cannot become knowledgeable of Indigenous law in a linear sense. People are not going to tap into that universal law, if you will. They're not going to have that knowledge and access to the multi-generations that can happen. The easiest way for me to explain it and to not exceed what I should not be sharing, because there are limits to what I can discuss about this. That is to say, in the typical Western way, it's very linear. You're very much stuck in the present. But under Indigenous law, I don't know how to describe it other than to consider it magical almost, or miraculous almost. You have access to the past, and you can see into the future. It's circular, and it can also happen at the same time. It's a phenomenon that can't be taught. The ability to access it, is not something you can write down steps for. And this isn't something like, enlightenment. And I know there's other, cultures and religions that have processes of developing your spirituality. This is not what I'm speaking about. I'm speaking about how do you access Indigenous law, how do you access Indigenous knowledge, how do you apply it and know what the best solution and best approach today will be in order to guarantee future generations. Well, you have to have some access to understanding future needs. And you have to have some access to the past where you can understand what was learned from that. Again, it's not linear. It's not a matter of precedent that you can simply pick up from someone today. It is something that you become part of. And this is why, in terms of describing Indigenous worldview and Indigenous laws and this concept of all my relations, the manner of learning can happen from watching animals. They teach things. They carry messages. You might get something strange said on the radio that triggers something and reminds you of something else that was said, and suddenly you have an awareness. Or you can be asking to yourself, I want to understand this. What do I need to know about this? And suddenly your path will be such that you stumble across a book, or someone comes to you and gives you some information, and you realize over time as you're gathering those pieces that, hey, I just had my question answered. But it wasn't like going to the law library, although that can be part of it, right? For instance, I've had experience of going into a law library, and instead of doing my regular research in terms of what I would how it would direct me to what I need to read or research, I just I feel compelled to walk down a particular aisle. I feel compelled to stick my arm out and pull out a book. And I feel compelled to open it up somewhere in the middle, and lo and behold, there's a case that when I go back and do it the regular way has been culled from the research tools that would normally point you to that. How do you explain that? I don't know, right? All I know is that's something that I call guidance. It's a powerful assistance that happens. And those, especially elders who have always been part of that, notwithstanding, things like residential school and literally having these things beaten out of them, to not view those things as healthy, to say that's the work of the devil. You can't talk about those kinds of things. Indigenous law is incredible, and if you think about it, if you think about how long it's been developed, when you think about when people came from Europe, for example, and met some of these people, they were scared to death because they had never seen the kinds of abilities that these people found as, that was just common, that was normal. That was, if you need to know where you should go to get food, you go in the shaking tent and you're shown, okay, here's where you should go, here's where they are. And you go and you get. And those are the gifts of the Creator. So how to start to appreciate the complexities of Indigenous law. It is not like Western law. It's not a matter of being able to take it and put it beneath Canadian law. It's not a matter of making space, as they say, constitutional space or space within common law and case law, to say we'll inject a little thing. This is not like a healing circle to assist in sentencing. Okay, while I appreciate the various efforts, if we really want to respect and start to access this powerful law, it's important that we don't try to kill it off first, obviously, right? It's important that we allow those flames of that fire to build brighter, and allow people like myself, for instance, tasked with carrying knowledge and being given access to certain ways of obtaining information and access to knowledge that can be quite mind-boggling at times and quite disconcerting at times. But, to, for example, identify or be given direction to ascertain a particularly serious issue, and to take a step to protect, not knowing whether it's going to make a difference or not, and then finding out 3, 4, 5 years later that, wow, yeah, if I hadn't done that, these other things would have happened. And thank goodness I did it at a time when it just felt like I had to do this now, right? And I had to incorporate certain principles of law, and I had to do some comparative law, and whatever the exercise was. You can think for many months, even years, on subject matters, but there's not the time to provide that. So also connected with Indigenous law and this concept of being circular, time can come together. There's also the right time. And that's why, for instance, I've never been disappointed in meeting with a group of truly traditional Indigenous people. We all get there at the same time. It's never the time that we plan for, but we do arrive at the same time, and the work starts in an incredibly powerful way. So that's all I wanted to share. It's about as much as I can do. It's a very, just to say, it's very difficult to contain Indigenous law within a law faculty, for example. But it's a start. I encourage people to begin to look at Indigenous law as truly an incredible system of law. But it's not isolated from the spiritual. It's not isolated from what you might consider the religious. It's not isolated from the people. It's just part and parcel, and it's still part of all our relations. That's all I have to say.